take out the injectors, first you have to remove the rear cowling. Then you have to remove the rear half of the mudguard. Then you have to remove the inner half of the mudguard. Then you have to remove the rear housing for the air filter. Then you have enough space to remove the front half of the air filter, and then you can remove the injectors. Of course, before you can remove the rear fender, you've got to remove the grab rail. And the little rubber plugs. You have a power connector here. I don't even know if you can see that. Yep, power connector here that's got to come off. It's held by these wires here. I might just actually be able to unplug that. Yeah, I can just unplug that. Great. And I can disconnect this, which is straightforward. Plug connector. Go. Rear light disconnected. Ugh, dirty. And power point disconnected. And a nice little dead spider in there just to keep you happy. Okay, to remove this section I have to remove the number plate because there is a screw behind it holding it. There are also a couple of screws here which hold it to the rear part. Can't see that, okay. There's also a Y bracket here that's going to have to come off. We'll contend with that in a minute. Let's get the number plate off first. I've had to remove the number plate to get at this screw here. There are also screws at the side here I've got to remove, and I think I've got to remove the indicators as well because they're all mounted onto this Y bracket which is holding that whole assembly on there. I'm going to do these side screws first, I think. Oh look, these side ones. 8s. Quite sure why there would be 2. Yeah, right, 2 there are, 2 they need to be removed. Those shouldered bolts. You'll be able to see this, I'm just doing the same thing on the other side. Now hopefully when I remove this the whole thing will come loose, and then I just need to unplug. And of course the rain has just started. Come on. There you go. One blue. There you go. Rather dirty, but there you go. That's got to remove these solenoids. 1, 2, and 3. The bolts are there to undo. Got a cylinder here to remove, which is a little crosshead screw. Next is to undo these two bolts, take this Y piece off because this won't be able to drop down with this bracket in the way. Next task is to remove this last section of rear mudguard, which I think is now only held by 2 bolts. And it's hooked over here somewhere. Now we have a couple of zip ties there holding it on here, so they'll need to come off as well. The grab rail's got to come off, otherwise the plastic can't pass below it. So yeah, we'll take that off first. 2 bolts, very simple. Let's get that done. Now my habit of putting bolts back into place has backfired a little bit on me, because these little chrome topped bolts that go in there actually prevent this from lowering, so I've had to take them back out temporarily. Also, when you're dropping this down, you've got to be able to get past that lock. It catches slightly, so you've got to pull it back in. Now it's plastic, so it's flexible, but as I said, once you've got these 2 bolts off, it will drop down. Now I have pulled it down a little bit, and there is something catching up at the front here. I haven't quite figured out what it is yet, but I'll let you know as I go. Right, I've had to pull the cables through that little gap there, because obviously when I try to pull this section out, they're going to catch on those cables. That being said, even when I try to pull it free, something is holding it. It's pivoting about something. I think the pivot point's just about where those cables come through. I'm going to have a close look and see what it might be catching on. Okay, after a bit of wriggling about, I pushed down on this right hand side, and it seemed to pop free from that red bar sticking out. And a bit more wriggling, and there appears to be a bar on this side as well, which has come free from. So now hopefully that mudguard is ready to come free. And what I found straight away is, as I pull the mudguard back, we've got some cables tied to it. I'm going to have to somehow get these cables free. And those cables go down to the rectifier, which is attached to the bottom of the front end of the mudguard. Now, rather than trying to fiddle about and detach it from there, I thought I'd follow the cables and see if I can unplug them from that end. As it turns out, that may not be quite so easy. I've disconnected one of the cables, which is fine in that clear packet, but the other one is attached, forgive me, behind here under this black cover. Now, I can't slide the black cover back far enough to see under it, because the cable splits a little further back, which is really hard to show you. Let's see if we can. And there's a tie holding it together, which won't allow that black cover to go back far enough. But I need to get in there to try and disconnect that cable. Once I've got that disconnected, I should be able to pull the mudguard free. Okay, I've managed to free it by pulling these cables out of the way and pulling it forward as far as I can. I managed to get it out far enough, and if you can just reach under the cover, press that little tab, you can pull the connector apart. So that wasn't as bad as I was expecting. I've now pushed the cables, back through in towards the mudguard. Hopefully I'll be able to lift that free. What I'm hoping to do is kind of roll it round the wheel and take it out from the back. It's worth pointing out that it is very tight against the suspension on both sides, and it does widen a little as it gets towards the battery box. So you can see the way that curves, and with a bit of twisting it's out. No discernible damage, no tabs appear to be broken off. I think we're all good. Here's a little design surprise for me. This is the air inlet into the airbox. This has to be taken off. It's got a couple of devices mounted to it. If I unplug these electrics, they'll come away without any problem. But the actual inlet leads down in towards the back wheel, which means that must be sucking in the air from the throw off from the wheel. Okay, that's the trumpet taken off, and only 3 screws, that's no problem. It's attached to this, I don't know, vacuum control. I could try pulling this line off so that I can disconnect the whole trumpet away from the bike, but to be honest I don't think I need to. I can let it just hang there for now. It's not hanging on anything other than rubber pipes. Not going to do any harm. So the next thing is to get the airbox out, which I think is only held by these 2 bolts. Okay, removing rear stage airbox. We do have those 2 bolts that I mentioned earlier, and they are loosened. I've got to disconnect all these electrics which are attached to the side of the airbox as well, and there's a screw in there which I think if I remove that, all of these will come free from the airbox, apart from this sensor here, which I have to just disconnect the electrics. I have to undo that screw, which is set way back. I don't think I have to take it out, at least I hope not. I can see it being a real pain to try and put it back in if I do. And once I've done that, that undoes a band which divides that part from that part. Now I seem to be foxed by this one screw. Is it set so deep, even with the longest shanked screwdriver I've got, which isn't that long, it cannot reach. It's not long enough. I can't get it between the airbox and the bracket. I've disconnected the screw that holds that plate, that's all free now. I've disconnected that electrical connector, so that's all free now. But the airbox is still stuck fast. Right, after a bit of messing about, I managed to get a screwdriver that would reach in. The difference wasn't really the length of the shank, but it was this chamfered edge, this kind of cone edge, whereas this lip was preventing it going in for further. This allowed it to go in just enough to reach the screw, and we have undone the clamp. Obviously I've now moved the air filter back a bit, only to find that when I try to remove it, it's being held by a hose pipe, and I can't get it quite free just yet. So I'm going to have to get a little pair of pliers in there and pull that hose off, and then I should be able to pull the airbox free. Well, a really awkward place to get into. I had to release a spring clamp, which I'll show you in a minute, but also I had to pull and tug at that hose to get it to come off. But at last it's come off, and at last I can get the airbox free. There are some motorbikes I've worked on that I thought taking the carburetors out was an absolute nightmare, but this job is going to top it all. I've disconnected the sub harness for the throttle bodies, so that's done. I've disconnected the hose that goes between the inlet housing and the rocker cover. And as far as I understand it, other than loosening these bands, which I've done, that should be it. I should now be able to just pull the throttle bodies backwards and they'll come out. However, this is the main wiring harness, which has to be moved out of the way to allow enough movement between the air cleaner housing and this crossmember spar. At the moment it's wedged between the two. Remove it, says the instructions, but this is the main wiring harness that feeds everything throughout the entire bike, front to back. And a good idea might be to just push it to one side, if only that were possible, because the harness goes to the inside of this tube. Hard to show from this angle. Goes underneath that one before rising up behind the airbox and heading forward. I've tried moving this assembly up and down, and the rubbers just want to go with it. It is pretty stiff in there. I can't move it down too much because part of the engine is below it, as well as these mounting brackets, and I can't move it up too far because the frame and much pipe work is above it. Perhaps I should just leave them on there and remove the engine from the frame with the throttle bodies in place. There is a cable going to the side stand detector that runs under there. It's on a clamp underneath the engine there, so I need to release that clamp and in turn release the cable. Let's get that sprocket off. Single bolt in the centre, shouldn't be any problem. Now this is the sprocket removed. I've also released the clamp holding this cable at the bottom there, so that cable's now out of the way. I've taken the alternator off. You can see where that casing's cracked away, and I've hung him the top out the way. It's still plugged in. There is a sensor in the middle there which needs to be either unplugged or removed. I think I'm going to unplug it, and I've traced it up to this bunch of connectors just here. There's also a sensor on the underside at the back of the engine, which again I believe it comes up to here to unplug. And we've also got a sensor here, a pickup, whose cable goes under and is held to the frame by a little clamp. But I've bent that back a little. I've taken the cables out the way. While doing that, I've discovered in there is a lower engine mounting bolt that goes right through to the far side. So there are in fact 3 mounting points, as I suspected there should be. Disconnected red and blue connectors from under that covering. Fed the wires back down behind the engine, and for now I'll just tuck them up out of the way. I've disconnected this sensor, the white sensor, which went underneath the airbox over the top of that mounting bracket in behind the frame rail. It was plugged in here. At the same time I was unplugging that, to make it easier to do, I unplugged this green connector so I could get at the little tab to undo the white, and I fed that back through as well. Turns out that that was actually the side stand sensor, so I've just tucked that wire out of the way. I'll go away and check, but I think that's now all the electrics disconnected. So the only thing left to do now, dun dun dun, move the sump. Sat back a minute to look at things, and I'm looking at this oil filter sticking out at the front there. That's not going to make it past these frame rails, is it? So that's got to come off. I guess I better get my strap and remove that. I'm going to have to take the sump off. I'm going to get a jack under it, so a couple of planks of wood, take the strain on the engine so that I undo all the mounting bolts. Once I've done that, I need to get some cloth to cover the frame rails to prevent the frame rails from getting scratched while I'm manoeuvring this about, and I've then got to think of the next stage of getting the engine out of the frame.